Hi, class. I wanted to I think this is so fitting this week. We're talking about parenting and adolescence, and this lecture, I'm just really going to focus on parenting because that's so much of it's just so much you can talk about just in that. I really do. I I think our guardian angel projects that you guys did, which I believe I'm almost done grading, um, have been so interesting to read, and you guys did a fantastic job. I just say how kind all of your guardian angels are, and I think it's interesting as people are parents. It's hard for us to be kind to ourselves sometimes in the midst of parenting because it's so complicated and so uncertain at times, and all those things, and sometimes we just need some kindness and encouragement. And I thought, like, most, if not all, of your guardian angels when reading your project were all so kind and so encouraging and um, uplifting to these new parents. Because as you know, becoming a new parent is really, really difficult. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of things you just have are trial by error. And I felt that, your guardian angels were so nice. And probably for a lot of people, that's just what they need, is someone just to kind of motivate them and encourage them as they're going through parenting. And so in chapter 7, it focused a lot on parenting. So that's where we're going to spend our time today. We're halfway done. You're doing great. I'm trying to stay on top of everything, all the grading, especially because you'll have an assignment due at the end of this week. So I'll be getting on your discussion boards this week, and everything should be caught up. Um, so anyhow, I just wanted to tell you, like, that kindness, that's sometimes what we need to show ourselves as parents, right? So there's four different types of parents. We have authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. Um, Typically, you see authoritarian as parents that lay down rules, um, and have and they have expectations that the rules will be followed without um, any sort of questioning. Authoritative parents explain rules and encourage discussion. Authoritative. Permissive is parents should accept their child's behavior, and there's not that consistency. And then uninvolved parenting, um, it's almost like neglectful, not attentive, things of that nature. Typically, children work best in authoritative parenting, because there's outcomes of potentially higher grades. I think the main thing in parenting, and I talk about this a lot when I have parents come in with their kids. The main thing is consistency. And with this type of model, there's more consistency because things are clear, there's boundaries, there's expectations, and nothing is questioned. Um, and this isn't the case in some of these other models, which is what causes kids to act out or push boundaries or see what they can do. Kids are very smart. They start pushing boundaries at a very young age. So it's important as parents, to be on top of this and to be aware of things and sticking to it. Now, consistency is not easy. This is coming from a person who not only is a therapist, but also as a parent. And consistency is hard. It can be exhausting. Not even physically exhausting as much as it can be emotionally exhausting, taxing, constantly having to be on top of your kids, especially your kids' different temperaments. They kind of demand different things. It can be very exhausting. But the bottom line is, staying on top of it is what's going to benefit you in the long run. Now, authoritarian parents cause kids to potentially be aggressive because it's more of like a dictatorship, right? One person's in charge and everybody's just supposed to abide by that person. You got permissive parenting, which can cause an impulsive child, and uninvolved, they tend to do poorly in school and maybe aggressive. Now, different cultures, parenting styles are different, and it's not make doesn't make necessarily one bad or good, but it's traditional to that culture. Um, Socioeconomic status can affect parenting, right? As even parent availability, right? If the socioeconomic status is maybe on the lower end, parents might be working more in order to make ends meet, which then causes problems potentially because the kids are left at home or left with the sitter or left left being taken care of maybe by somebody else, and that brings in a whole other parenting dynamic with like a grandparent or things of that nature. These are things to take into consideration too when you're working with families, is understanding what's going on at home. So you better know how to treat the family and know what's going on. Understanding who is all in the home, who's involved with parenting, things like that. It's super, super important. So you know what to address and what not to address. Um, Again, parenting is really difficult. Just because someone is of a higher socioeconomic status doesn't grant that their parents are home all the time, nor does it grant that their kids are going to turn out one way or the other. I think parenting in general, it really is, it's a hard thing across the spectrum. There's certain things that pay a toll on parenting. A lot of it too comes from the kind of parents that you had, right? And how that shapes your role of parenting. Sometimes I'll have clients that have parents that maybe there was a lot of shortcomings, but if we look at that parent's parents, we'll see that their parent did the best that they could based on the skills and things that they had. Which not doesn't justify maybe negative behavior, but it explains some things sometimes. Um, Parents can influence children, right? We can influence them in positive ways and negative ways. Um, you know, Children model parents. I remember one time, I think it was my eldest son, and my husband had recorded him putting him in timeout, and he thought it was funny. And then I remember I got home and he showed me the video, and I got, at first I kind of was laughing, and then I got kind of disturbed because he was mimicking how we put him in timeout, and he was pointing his finger and he was waving it, and he was like, sit down, and it was just, I was like, I told my husband, I said, he's mimicking us. And I'm like, this isn't cool, and this is how we look to him. So it's kind of eye-opening. And so kids are watching how we talk, how we communicate with one another, how we handle conflict, and that's they're like little sponges, and they're taking in those kinds of things, which can be problematic if there's problematic things going on in the home. And part of, trying to figure out parenting is trying to figure out how do we take care of issues, like punishment, spanking, all these things, right? Like all these things that we to try to show consequences. I firmly think that we need to be consistent with even our punishment, so kids know what to expect, and being clear with what's going on. Not even especially depending on the age of the child, we don't need a lot of words as much as being like, either your choices are you can turn down the TV or you can turn it off. And then just being very consistent in that. So I told my kid, you can turn down the TV or I'm going to turn it off. They refuse to listen. I just turn off the TV. It's simple. They know what to expect. They heard what I said. It's simple. But if we just keep saying it and saying it and saying it and saying it, usually that increases anger and frustration. And it's like they really don't believe that you're going to turn off the TV. That's how kids will push things, right? So punishment is best done when we do it right after something happens, when we address it right away. It has an explanation, but with explanations, I think nowadays in our culture, we really, encourage explaining things, which I'm not against by any means. But for a little child, they're not going to understand some big, gigantic speech explanation. I think keeping it simple, keeping it um, to their level is important. We want to do it in a calm way, right? Um, I think it's just trying to navigate how to establish punishments best. And I think that's something that needs to be mutually decided upon between you and a partner. Um, so, people give timeouts. And usually that's putting in a kid in an environment. So I wouldn't put a child in a timeout in their playroom. It's not really super upsetting. Probably in a space where they can't, maybe be involved, or where they don't have all their toys, or it's really not just another space for them to be entertained and really not paying attention to the fact that they're getting a consequence for an action. So those are things. Um, Parents getting along, not getting along. That affects kids. Kids are very, very smart and they really do pick up on the emotional tone in a family and they can pick up what's going on between parents. Um, and it affects them deeply. You know, divorce is really hard on kids, really, really hard on kids. Um, Having it be a team is important, not one against the other, or one's the fun parent, one's the disciplinarian, good cop, bad cop. I think that should be a shared role. Kids should be able to know they can expect the same from mom as what they expect from dad. I think that's really important. I think there needs to be a united front, even if parents agree on a topic, to disagree about it. Um, Behind closed doors so the kids don't know, because kids will try to drive a wedge, especially as they get older, to use it to their advantage. Um, and so just being conscientious of that and really, really being on the same page, I think that's something important. Um, Being stressed at work, you know, and especially if the work stuff comes home, kids will sense that and they know it and they will um, get nervous or worried or anxious about things that have nothing to do with them. So it's just being mindful of this. Um, and again, you know, divorce is something that happens quite a bit in our culture. And that pays a toll on children. Now, I think the way to work through that is by making sure we're being honest about things and addressing things and um, trying to co-parent as best as possible. I mean, yes, there's going to be change, but I think we can be as mature as possible with that change. Now, some people, based on their circumstances, it's just not possible to have that kind of experience with the ex-husband or wife. However, if it is a more symbiotic, mutual decision, even if there's still disagreements between the two adults, if they can keep it as symbiotic as they can for the child or children, that is to the children's benefit. I look at a lot of court mandated stuff is co-parenting. Even there's different portals or websites to be doing a lot of the co-parenting on nowadays, and that's a strong encouragement from the court. I see it being really, really great and run really smoothly for children, despite all the change that's going on, if they know they have both of their parents, and that if they can see their parents together in situations and it not be stressful. So often kids get put in the middle of those kinds of situations, and that's really not their place. It's really the place of the grown-ups, especially for the oldest child. It seems like they get really placed in that role of being middleman, and to be able to take the kid out of that role and not have the pressure on them is huge, is really, really huge. So if parents can do that or create that kind of atmosphere, I think it's really beneficial. Even if other people become involved, like a step parent or other children or things of that nature, just really being on the same page will help the kids to feel comfortable, feel safe, and not feel as threatened in the midst of a very difficult situation. Now, like I said, it's not the case, nor would that work for every scenario, but for the ones that it does work for, it can work very beautifully, but it is putting aside a lot of things sometimes that can be hard, you know, to do, especially at the very beginning. But they offer a lot of therapy for even doing co-parenting, which again is beneficial because if the parents still can be on the same page despite not being married to each other, again, there's consistency for the child, and that's important that there be that consistency. Siblings, big part of family, right? It's a big decision to bring other kids in the family. So for a firstborn, having siblings affects, right? Um, you know, older siblings typically tend to be rule followers, have close relationships with their younger siblings. Um, you know, those are all kinds of things. They tend to be more black and white. There's a I read a book, there's a lot of books on birth order. There's some great books out there on birth order. And it's very interesting as I look at each one of my children and just know their different temperaments and I can see the birth order in them. I've even read special books on birth order with middle children, especially when I knew I was going to have a middle child. And it's interesting to see who are famous middle children anyways, so there's a lot with birth order and how just the order that you're born and how that maybe affects your temperament a little bit. So for my house, I have four of the same gender. They do play really well together. Um, it's important for parents to try to not play favorites, to see their children all as equals. Obviously, certain kids have different privileges based on their age and things of that nature. But I think consistency in that will help the kids to not feel like there's favorites or not feel chosen over, things of that nature, which is important. Um, they're saying that parents are more affectionate and more punitive towards firstborn children. I feel like firstborn children, I'm a firstborn, can be sometimes the testers, right? They're the first to tread the way for everybody else. And so I think with that comes a lot of trial and error. Some things work really well and some things don't. And I think sometimes firstborns get the brunt of that. Not that that makes them weaker or less loved or anything. I think if anything, it makes them more resilient. However, I think it is something that does happen sometimes with firstborns. I think sometimes by the last child, they can be more free spirited or whatnot. One, maybe because parents are more. I just even look at how I was with my oldest son as an infant to how I am with my fourth son, and just the things that don't bother me that bothered me when with my first son. Even feeding him solid foods, I was super like rigid and rule follower, right? And by my fourth one, it was like, sure, have this, as long as it wasn't going to harm him or hurt him, I was like, yeah, why not? What's the big deal? Something falls on the floor, I don't freak out. Whereas with my first son, I was just way more rigid. One, because I didn't know what I was doing as much, and one, I was trying to do everything just right. And not that I don't want to do things right for my last son, it's just I've learned like it's all going to be okay, and some of you could relate to that or could observe families that you could relate to this with. Um, and so for a firstborn, there's just either the first one to go to school, got to register for kindergarten. I mean, all these things. I remember my son when with kindergarten, we were trying to get him in a dual immersion program. And my son didn't even know any of this was going on. And initially he didn't get in. He later did get in, but initially he didn't. And I was like devastated. And I'm like, here I am devastated about something that my son doesn't even know about. But if he didn't get in, it made it harder for all the other ones. It was just all these things. But those are things I worry about with my next son or the ones to follow. It's my oldest son. I get that gets to experience all these things or doesn't even know some of these experiences are going on because he's the first. So, it just is very interesting with birth order and kids and trying to navigate all that. It's very, very interesting. Going back to divorce, again, there's all these legal things. So it's important when you're doing therapy and you have kids that come in that maybe are divorced to understand who has what privileges or rights to even put their kid in therapy. I think in a lot of divorce situations, depending on the circumstance, I communicate with both parents because I want both parents to be on the same page for the sake of the child. Now, that's not the case for all children, but in a lot of cases that is, and so I try to do that. I also emphasize that that's not my role to determine custody and things like that, which sometimes people have a very clear objective with what they want therapy to be, and I make it very clear that is not my objective, and you have that right too, as you start to see clients, to not allow people to kind of persuade you or push you into doing something for their advantages, because your role is as the child's therapist, not the parent's agenda that they may have. I think it's important in therapy too, like to get special tools or things to help kids when they go through divorce to understand their parents love them. This has nothing to do with them, because it's very easily for kids to take things of that nature very personal and feel like if maybe they were a better child or made better decisions or things of that nature, that maybe their parents would be fighting so much, when really none of that has anything to do with them. So, and being able to be very honest with parents. I tend to be very honest and tell them, like, how, if how they're behaving is affecting their child. I'm very straightforward about it. Like, this is for the kids' benefit. It has nothing to do with them. And so much in those situations, sometimes it becomes so about them that they're missing the small people. And so sometimes my role as the clinician is to be very clear and very direct so the parents will see what their choices and how their choices and decisions are affecting the child. Not that that means that they're getting back together or anything, but just means like how they communicate, how they stop putting that person in the middle will then hopefully release some stress and anxiety on their child. So child abuse, there's sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, psychological abuse, which psychological abuse can be kind of harder to detect or to prove. Most common maltreatment is neglect, which is very, very upsetting. It's hard with physical punishment because some cultures condone certain things. And so, understanding that like certain behaviors are not okay here in the US and that they'd be just seen as being physical punishment is important to explain and to help understand. Kids living in poverty can cause parents to use physical punishment. Social isolation. So you live in the middle of nowhere. You're not really exposed to anything. We look at that poor family where the kids were all locked up. I think, what was it, in Menifee or Paris, I think it was. And how tragic that was, right? And they were totally socially isolated. They weren't in touch at all with the outside world. And so there was a lot of things going on and nobody knew, right? So that's not a good thing. Parents possibly have been abused. Um, some things to look for: a sick, crying child, children who have, they just look unkept, not clean. It comes out in their play, what they say. Kids will be very honest and not even realizing what they're saying and how that reveals something. And so just being conscientious of that to pick up on those things, especially as mandated reporters, right? We have to make sure we're very aware of what our scope is and what our job is in regards to that. And so just making sure you're looking for signs, especially if you plan on working with kids. But anyhow, there's a lot of resources out there for parenting, through churches, through community organizations. School districts offer like positive parenting and things of that nature. One, it's books to read. It's just being willing to admit that maybe you need help and need some extra skills, which there's nothing wrong with that. Parenting is hard. Even if you had the best of parents, it's still a whole other beast once you become a parent, right? And so I think it's just trying to encourage parents to get additional resources. Plus, kids have additional things that make sometimes there be challenges, right? And so understanding, how do I work with a kid with ADD? How do I address behavior with a kid that has ADHD? My kid has anxiety. What am I supposed to do? Nobody listens to me in my house. How am I supposed to deal with that? Because I'm screaming and yelling and none of that's working. Like, these are all things that people experience, and I think to be able to encourage them and to give them the proper information, even if that means sometimes we have to do a CPS report, that could be a door that opens that allows a parent to get extra services to help them learn how to work with their kid better. It doesn't always have to be some horrific thing. Sometimes it's just they need help and they don't know where to get it. If there's extra financial stress going on in the family, that brings out a whole other side of the parents. To be able to alleviate some of that, that could help them to then be able to work on other things. Who knows? There's so many things that go on in households, right? As we all know. The main thing is that as clinicians, that we're aware of what's going on, we are aware of resources, and that we can be able to encourage, but also be there to protect if needed. I think also with kids, making them understand that that they're safe is important, and that they can feel free to be open and share with you as a therapist what's going on, and then knowing that you're there to help them, that will release some stress and anxiety as well too. So anyhow, this is some information on parenting. Parenting, like I said, is not easy, and we do play a big, obviously, role with kids, and so to not take that lightly, clearly. and as parents, I encourage you, it's hard. Even though I'm a therapist, it's so hard. My joke with people is when I'm out in public, I never tell anyone what I do for a living when I'm with my kids, because it all seems to fly out the window, right? Because it's hard, right? It's a challenge. But to just know, to take it one day at a time, and to be consistent as best as you can. And if you have a rough day, to wake up the next day, to make sure you ask for forgiveness from your kids, because they need to know that grown-ups can make mistakes and we can be sorry, but I can say sorry, and we can move on and things can get better, right? And we have to forgive ourselves too. And so, because again, it's not easy. Do we want to be abusive or anything of that nature? Absolutely not. But parenting, it is not just a walk in the park. It's an adventure, that's for sure. Um, but it is a beautiful thing as well. So, anyways, I hope that's some helpful insight. There's a lot of great things on a lot of great other videos that are during this section if you get a chance to watch them. I know you guys have a lot going on. I hope you have a great week. Halfway done. We're almost there. Thank you so much.